Welcome to the J.Geiger Studios podcast, where we help you achieve your ideal outcome. We're here to provide value to you and your organization every step of the way. I'm your host and guide on this journey, J.Geiger, and I'm happy you are here with us today. Today in the studio, we have Matt Sohrweide, and we're going to cover a multitude of topics pertaining to ERP. Welcome, Matt.
Well, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeff.
Yeah, it's I'm just super thankful that you were able to join me here in the studios.
It was a long walk.
It was? Yeah, you opened your office door and stepped into the studio. Yeah, it's good stuff. It's good stuff. Man, how long have we known each other now?
I don't know exactly, but through the J.D. Edwards ecosystem, I would say, it's got to be at least 15 years, if not closer to 20.
Since you're almost just out of college, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I didn't start in ERP straight out of college, but pretty close. So I've been doing this for over 20 years now. So I think I got my start in early 2002.
Wow, that's crazy. It's hard to, you think back 20 years ago. Man, the time flies. Where did it go?
No smartphone for me back then.
No, that's funny. Think of that. The technology we have in our pockets today, if we would have had that way back then, whole systems didn't even have that performance.
It's very interesting because actually, as part of that first job, we had an offsite about what types of technology might be coming down the line. And one of the things I said is, I think we'll be able to basically have the power of a computer in a phone that we're able to just dock to a screen, throw it in our pocket, and it doesn't matter where we're going to work.
So the others in your group, did they believe you about that?
They're like, yeah, maybe. Obviously laptops existed, but we're pretty close to that point. I don't see a whole lot of people docking their phones into a docking station, but we're probably not that far off.
That was probably there was a bit of a transitionary state where we had stuff like that, but it wasn't the phone. It was actually a completely different device. Like the BlackBerry. Do you remember what the heck happened to BlackBerries? Are they still around?
I don't think they're still around anymore. I did have one at one point in time at one company I worked with. They required that you used a BlackBerry, but even by that point, there was almost nothing left in the ecosystem. Yeah. So it was purely a work-only device.
Man, time flies. Yeah, and it's interesting. We we deal with putting change on our customers all the time and making them go through periods of change. And there's those people that that they have to have the latest and greatest technology all the time, and so they're the first ones to have the BlackBerry. Yep. And then there's those people that they drag their feet and they still have flip phones today.
You mean those people who are still running perhaps a very old version of an ERP system and are coding like it's 1999?
Hey, we all should be coding like it's 1999. Yeah, I remember those days. Yeah, everybody's all freaked out about Y2K and what was going to happen. I happen to think, this might be a little bit of a controversial subject, but I happen to think we as programmers, because I was programming back then, did such a great job. We prevented the world from shutting down. Not that it wasn't a big deal. We just did such a great job.
I'm sure there was a lot of heroic work that was done during those times. But again, it points to you have to be thinking about the future, even if the future seems to be a long ways off. You know what? Those numbers are going to turn over from 99 to double zeros at some point. So you might want to take that into account.
I think we've got a ways to wait until the year 3000 or something that's got 5 digits instead of 4. So I think I don't know if I'm going to be around then.
You don't think you're going to be around for that one?
Probably not. Okay. Not unless I can upload my brain like Elon Musk is starting to talk about. So
that's a different podcast.
That is, yes. So you mentioned ERP and you've been working with it for a long time. Tell me about that. Like how did it start? How did you get into it? And what were some of the favorite things that you got to do out of the gate?
So, okay, a little bit of a funny story. So I actually learned about ERP systems in college. And so this was back in those in the 1900s.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So I actually had a professor who had a class that I took in college on ERP systems, and the book was his book, it was written and printed in the like university copy room, just with like one of those little plastic binders or whatever, because nobody was teaching anything on ERP systems or necessarily even talking about them at that point in time.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Even in the 1900s, though, they'd been around for about 30 years by then, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, they'd been around for a while, but nobody was teaching about them, best practices, anything like that. So he actually had a class that I took on what is an ERP system, how does it work with your organization, and how do you evaluate and pick an ERP system. And so we actually went through an exercise of helping a company select an ERP system based on, you know, what they were doing as a company and what would be a good fit for them.
Wow. And you know, in hindsight, I wish I had that class. Man, that was really cutting edge at the time. And I don't think any classes like that really exist in college today. Is that?
I don't think they do. I do know that some of the ERP providers back in the day, they would try to work with college campuses to offer a track, offer some classes where students would come out experienced in their ERP system, perhaps experienced in you know, the code set tool base that was used with it.
Right.
But I don't see a whole lot of that even to this day.
Well, interesting. And if there's anybody out there listening, there's a hole. That sounds like a hole out there that college students need to know about this, because ERP systems are not going away. They're the backbone of the organization. They're the central system that things are happening in. And sure, you could piece stuff together, but man, wow, that's really that's something.
Yeah, it was. And so I'm like, okay, well, this is good. This is good to know about. And then, you know, I graduated college, got a job, and there was this thing that kind of impacted all of our lives called 9/11.
Oh, okay. So, very beginning of the 2000s, that's when you graduated college, somewhere in that ballpark?
Exactly. And so
what part of the state were you living?
So I was living in Green Bay.
Okay.
So I took a position. I actually had the position all lined up, signed, sealed, and delivered before.
And then 9/11 hit?
It was before Christmas of my last year of graduating. And then I took that position, and 9/11 happened, and the company I was working for, I was working in a branch that was going to be spun off and have an IPO. And we all know how the stock market went after 9/11.
That was a really tumultuous time. Yeah.
It was. And I came into work one day and found out that my team no longer existed.
Wow.
And
you
not
included?
Yeah, me included.
Okay.
And, well, I still existed.
Yes. Good thing.
I just didn't exist as an employee of that corporation. Okay. But so actually there was the majority of that development wing of that company didn't exist anymore.
Okay, so here you are on the streets.
So yeah, it's
ready
a great
for a new job.
Right after you graduate college, it's really great. Right heading into the holidays to get to tell all your friends and family that guess what? I'm no longer gainfully employed.
So but you weren't married at the time, right?
No.
Okay, so you had you to count on, and but wow, so how did that hurt your ego at all?
I don't know that it hurt my ego. It was just like, okay, now what? And maybe I should have taken the other job offer I had coming out of college.
Well, you flipped a coin, you picked the wrong side.
Well, I actually don't think I did.
Okay.
Because I took the position that was located in Green Bay. It was close to friends and family. And it actually led to my next job, which is where I got to start in ERP systems.
And otherwise, you might not have gotten into ERP then.
Nope.
Wow.
I was hired by a company that was running an ERP software called JD Edwards. And
my favorite.
Well, mine too, but we'll get into that a little bit later.
Okay.
So they were running that ERP system, and I had no experience in it whatsoever. But to your point, there's a hole. And so there weren't a lot of people who were available who knew that ERP system. So the company was willing to hire me
with no experience
in that ERP system, and send me off, get some training, and kind of learn on the job how to be a JD Edwards developer. And
I had 1 week's of training before I became a JD Edwards developer back in my day. How long did you get to go?
I technically had 0 weeks of training before I started because, back then you couldn't take the courses online. You had to go off to the training center. So I got a little bit of a run through of kind of how it worked, but I actually started because I had experience running SQL queries. I was actually the data warehouse for the company. So people would say, hey, we need to know who bought from us last year and hasn't bought from us yet this year in this product line. And so I would go create ad hoc queries and get that.
Sounds like this is the second time you've been way ahead of the curve on that. I think everybody's doing that today now. So
right.
Yeah.
So that was how I got my start. And I really enjoyed it. I actually, in college, made the switch from being a computer science major to being a business information systems major because I more enjoyed what I was doing, helping businesses solve those types of problems than moving 2 bits of data however many milliseconds faster than an operating system.
So essentially, becoming the translator for the need and turning it into a need and solving that problem, that's what you really liked, not so much the bits and bytes of it.
Exactly. I liked the problem solving. I liked being able to understand and apply and have visible, tangible evidence of what I was doing, and then being able to help others to accomplish what they were looking to accomplish more efficiently or at a lower cost or whatever goal they were looking to achieve.
So do you remember your first big project that you did?
Did a couple big projects initially, but they were mostly at that point, I would say, upgrades of the JD Edwards system. So back then, JD Edwards would have an annual update that you had to take. So it was going in, looking at the modifications that have been made, retrofitting it, and working through that. So obviously, I was a bit of a worker bee on those projects.
So you got assigned out the code that needed to get updated, and then you'd do that. And
And then a year or two later, it's like, oh yeah, you remember how this works.
Oh,
so
you
can
done this before,
right? You can kind of take the lead on this.
I haven't looked at it in a year or two.
Yeah. So that was kind of where I got my start. I then worked with them to implement manufacturing and manufacturing accounting.
Okay.
Within their facility. So that was where I really got my start in the manufacturing module and area with JD Edwards or ERP in general.
Sure.
And so then I really got to understand how the software was configured, what the quote unquote right way was to do things, and how things got set up. So then I really became not only a technical expert, but I would say a functional subject matter expert in that area.
Okay. So, that's one of my more favorite areas as well. Manufacturing, of course, in the JD Edwards world, distribution as well, where you're talking inventory, receiving, purchasing, sales, all that.
Well, and that's pretty common in our part of the country as well. There's a lot of manufacturing, paper companies, things of that nature. And so it's very easy to take those concepts and translate them into the technical side of things.
Sure. So along your journey here, what's been the most difficult project you've ever been a part of, and what made it difficult?
That's a really good question. I would probably say the most difficult project I worked on was taking a company and upgrading their ERP system 2 versions. So they were going from...
Did they make a double jump or do that in a single jump?
They did it in a single jump because at that point in time, JD Edwards, and I have worked with other ERP systems, but a lot of it has been in JD Edwards just because that's where I came up, and that's just because that's the one I have a lot of experience in. But I mean, I've worked with Microsoft D365, Oracle, Epicor, but a lot of work in JD Edwards. And they had a version 8.12, then they came out with version 9, and then they came out with version 9.1. And
was 8.12 very stable?
8.12 was decently stable.
Was it 8.10 that was the one that wasn't? 8
was terrible.
Okay. That was the one that they wanted to hurry customers through because there were problems with it.
810, almost nobody stayed on. That was right after PeopleSoft acquired them, and then Oracle went and acquired JD Edwards. So then 811 was not very stable, but they had 811 update 2 where they stabilized it.
Okay.
But they would have a release every so many years, and if you wanted to stay on support, you could only fall so far
next number. Yep.
You could only fall so far behind. Well, people figured out how to game the system because it was costly to have to go through an upgrade, especially if you've heavily modified your system. You have to take time, pull the developers out.
Yeah, do all that retrofitting you're talking about.
Well, and don't get me started on business resources for testing because, the business has got to keep running, but somebody's got to make sure this is working correctly. Yep. And so you have all of that overhead, time, and cost. So they figured out that if you skipped a version, you could still stay on support, but you had to
go every other one.
Every other one. But it's a bigger jump, so it's more work. And I was tasked with leading that upgrade and getting it accomplished in a shortened period of time.
So how short are we talking here?
Like we did it in, I'm going from memory, but it was around 67 business days.
Whoa. That is a really short time for a big upgrade like that.
Correct.
I was thinking you were going to say it when you started saying 6. I was thinking 6 months. Wow.
Well, 67 business days. So that would have been.
That's like 3 months plus.
Yeah.
3.5 months.
Right. Yeah. That's probably about right.
Yeah. Like there's roughly 20 business days a month. That's nuts.
We did a little bit of analysis and prep work coming into it. But then from the day we were given a development environment to the day we went live was, I think it was pretty close to 67 business days.
Wow. That's amazing. Kudos to you and the team for doing that. That's pretty hefty.
A great team.
I'm assuming that it was successful.
It was successful. It involved some long hours. It involved some weekends there during that time. But we couldn't afford to tie up that many resources for that long. We had a window where we had availability from the business during a little bit of a slow time. So we had to hit that for testing. So it was challenging because I was the PM on the project as well as the technical lead and doing some retrofitting, but also having to coordinate the testing and all of that.
That sounds like a pretty big role. That's a lot of responsibility there. And I think that's something for another podcast in the future. It's like, how do you do these upgrades in a shortened period of time? I mean,
very carefully,
and lots of hours. Yeah. So with the ERP, what's been the most rewarding for you with it? Like, what have you liked most about it?
I really enjoy getting to work with a business team, a client, whatever group it may be, in really being able to help them solve a problem. So digging into, okay, this is where you're feeling pain. This is what's going wrong. Okay.
Right.
How do we want to solve it?
Right.
Okay. Is that really how we want to solve it? Or is there a root cause underneath it that we can get to resolve it?
Sure. So are you one of those kind of guys that you think, okay, so it's got this way of doing things, and if it can't do this way of doing things, like the book way, or I don't know if you ever run into this in the past where you find a way. I think a good example is I had a customer who needed some functionality where it was really built for the apparel industry.
Okay.
And you'd have multiple dimensions, like the color. You'd have multiple colors, multiple sizes, multiple fabrics, let's say. Well, they wouldn't go create, let's say you had 3 different fabrics, 3 different sizes, and 3 different colors. It'd be 3 times 3, 9 times 3, 27, if my math is right. Sorry. Whoa.
We'll edit that out later if it's wrong.
Right. I mean, that's only if you're dealing with 3 of each, but what if you had like 15 different colors and you had, 5 different fabrics and 5 different sizes? Now you're talking about a much bigger number. And if you're going to make or sell those, you have to have an item number for every single one of those, and you have to keep that item number up to date and everything. So it creates a data management nightmare in instances. So the apparel industry came up with that as a way to do it where you don't have to create all the items in your item master. I don't even remember what they called it because it's been so long.
Configurator, if I recall.
Yep. Yeah, that sounds right. Well, so I had a customer that was looking into, I don't remember if they actually put it into practice or not, but they had metal. They made metal products, different widths and heights and metals and colors. So they had 4 different dimensions where they wouldn't have to create all those different objects. They looked into how they could use that apparel industry functionality applied. So are you more of a book person, or are you one that you'll take the functionality and adapt it, even though it might not be specifically related to that business?
I like to start with the book, because if there's a way to do it that the system already has the functionality, you want to make sure that you're leveraging your investment, what you spent, because likely they have a software team that put a lot more time and effort into it.
And by the book is the use case that the company came up with.
Right.
So secondarily, you might look for other ways to do it with the software out of the box that might not be correct or might not fit a use case.
Or will it get us 80% of the way there? A project I worked on was the company was selling paper forms. So this was a while ago. So, and they were collated bundles of forms that worked with specific softwares. So it was tax software.
Sure.
So you had the government forms for each state and all that kind of stuff. So they would collate them into bundles. So the customer would say that they want 450 of these. Well, they would collate them into bundles of 100, 50, 25, and I think they might have even gone down to 10. And so
at some way it has to add up to 450.
It has to add up to 450. But out of the box, if you're going to do that, the system would say, oh, well, we don't have an item that equates to 450 eaches of these. So it would try to generate 400. It would say, fill it with 450 individual pieces of this form. So J.D. Edwards had the functionality of kits. They didn't have manufacturing installed at this company, and so they had the functionality of kits. Well, kits couldn't have dynamic bills of material, but J.D. Edwards could handle that. But there was one line of code in the underlying C code that was in there that prohibited that from happening. So I knew that functionality existed, and I said, if you're willing to tolerate the mod, we can turn that flag off. So
are you saying that you, with one line of code, you're able to solve that business problem?
It might have technically been like 3 lines of code, because there could have been an if around the flag.
Still, wow, that's amazing. With just a tiny change like that. That sounds like something that, hey, hot take, that maybe they should have that in their software.
Well,
they since?
They do have the functionality in their software, but they would like you to be utilizing the work order module to be able to say, okay, I need 450 of these, and you can have a bill of material that takes the components and makes 450.
Sounds like it should be a processing option. What is that?
Like that.
If you're not a J.D. Edwards person, maybe you wouldn't know.
I haven't dug into the depth of it. They may have fixed that. They may have a more elegant way of doing it. But to your point, we started with, what is the software intended to do?
Sure.
It wouldn't do it. The software has something that's pretty close in functionality, but we're not able to use it the way we are. So then we want to go in and surgically make a small change to allow it to happen, versus creating an entire custom system that has to be maintained to accomplish this.
Exactly. Wow. Yeah, that's pretty amazing. Wow. Yeah, I mean, that's really creative. And I think you do have to be creative, think on your feet, know what it does, know what it doesn't do, and really be able to get in at that detail level to be able to make a 3-line coda change. Technically really only 1, but yeah. So we've been spending most of our time, and you mentioned most of your experience was in J.D. Edwards software. I know a little bit about it too, and you wrote a white paper on that and put it on our website. Why don't you tell me a little bit about what you know about the history of it? Because I think that's something that people like to know. I mean, that's a typical life cycle of a piece of software.
So J.D. Edwards, I couldn't tell you the exact date that they were founded, but they were actually pretty early to the game, and they created an ERP system
sometime in the 70s, right?
Yeah, I believe so, yeah. And they were early to the game, and they wrote an ERP system that would handle financials and work with manufacturers, and it only ran on IBM software and hardware.
Okay.
So it was specific to that. And that's where you get the old green screen look and feel of JD Edwards, and JD Edwards World ran on that.
So World
IBM
is a legacy piece of software that runs on the IBM system.
Correct.
And you mentioned something about focused on financials and manufacturing. That's interesting because I've noticed that depending on what the focus was, the software seems to take on the personality of that focus. So PeopleSoft, for instance, was built, I think, on HR.
Yep.
And so a lot of people call it human capital management, although I'm not a huge fan of that because I don't, I look at people as individuals and not so much as a piece of capital. But that seemed to have that kind of a focus. And the SAP, they came, I think, out of manufacturing and whatnot. Probably manufacturing and finance, probably similar. And so numbers and, tracking of the data and everything becomes very important to them.
Right. And so it's interesting that you bring up SAP because JD Edwards, as they progressed, they wanted to become more and more flexible. So they came up with a system that they called One World, which was mostly
client server, right?
Correct.
Yep.
And it was platform agnostic. So you didn't have to just run it on an IBM AS400 back in the day.
Mid to late 90s.
Correct.
Yeah. Well, having been a little bit on the older side, I won't say old yet, but back then, I think the landscape of operating system and database was still kind of developing, and we had Oracle database, we had DB2 database, Microsoft. I'm pretty sure that SQL Server had come out by then, but maybe it wasn't as popular or robust. I remember Sybase and a bunch of other databases out there that I don't even know where they are these days.
Right.
FoxPro.
Oh, sure.
I think FoxPro got bought by Microsoft, but all these various tools, they, as far as operating systems and databases, I'm assuming they didn't know what was coming down the pike.
Right. And the individuals at JD Edwards, they knew that there was more out there and that they could reach a broader audience with their software if they weren't tied to just IBM hardware. So that's where One World came to being, that you could install this on multiple server sets, multiple different database types, and it would run. And so it was a pretty big leap. And in addition to that, and this is why it's interesting you bring up SAP, is they were kind of the opposite of SAP. SAP says you can run your business this way.
Okay.
You can pick one of these 8 ways to set it up. And I'm just making up a number, but you can configure it this way, but you cannot change the code.
Right.
JD Edwards, right, wrong, or indifferent, gave you the ability to change the code. They had their own code set built on top of, it was C underneath, and you could actually modify that, which is what I had to do with that example earlier.
Right.
But that you could add fields to reports and screens and applications, and you could add additional logic. You could put in an extra error check here. You could do all of these things. You could even write your own applications and reports in their tool set. They were extremely flexible for their time. But on the flip side, when you wanted to move to the next version,
depending on how you did it, you're handcuffed basically.
Well, or you would have to spend a lot of time accounting for it.
Right.
So it was JD Edwards. That's why they fit well in the space that they were in, kind of mid-sized, a lot of manufacturing companies, distribution companies. They had some niches in, real estate, wine blend and grower management, some of these other areas.
I've heard a lot of governments run it as well.
A lot of governments ran, especially the old green screen versions of World.
Sure.
Because it was solid in the financials.
Right. Yeah, and so I think today, if we were to kind of lay out what databases and what operating systems it supports, the primary ones are Oracle. They're an Oracle company now. So Oracle, DB2 on AS400, and Oracle on Linux or Unix. And then you have Microsoft SQL Server on a Microsoft server. So that's basically the 3 different configurations, and I suppose that you could interchange any of those, but they're probably going to run best
Correct.
within those combinations.
Correct.
And so it can fit within whatever. Do you have any preference, or does it really impact you?
It doesn't really impact me. What it comes down to in most cases is what tools and technologies, databases, servers that your organization has the skill set and the aptitude to work with.
So if you're used to running Exchange servers and everything on the Microsoft stack, maybe that's your way. If you got Unix, Linux folks, and you're an Oracle database kind of place, got a DBA on staff, maybe that's your thing. Yep. Right. Okay, that makes sense.
Exactly. And so that's why as they moved to that one world where you weren't required to run it just on an IBM platform, you started to see companies move away because their only IBM server at that point may have been that AS400 that was running J.D. Edwards.
So you mentioned the changes in the J.D. Edwards system. What are the types of changes that you've seen? Oh, okay, but that's probably a really big question there. So how do you go about changing the system? What are the things that you have to do to make it work?
Well, I mean, again, you want to start with that out of the box functionality. You're purchasing a tool when you buy an ERP system that is hopefully, and I believe in this case, is well designed to accomplish the task that it needs to. You want to, if you were implementing it brand new, you want to look at how can I leverage the best practices in this software to better run my business?
Right.
How can I align with that, or one of the options? Again, most ERP systems provide you with multiple options on how you can configure and run your system that meet most of your needs. However, you may have some unique use cases and requirements, or you may have some things that differentiate you that are, key competencies for your organization, and that's where you want to look to, okay, maybe it makes sense to make a modification.
Yep.
And so then you want to compartmentalize that modification when you make it as best that you can, so that it is easy to find it, it's well documented, and it's easy to retrofit. So that's why if you can build it into, say, a business function, and it's all encapsulated in there, you have this business function to maintain, but anytime you're using it, you're only making a one-line code call in wherever you need to call it from.
Right. So, I'm assuming that a lot of the systems are very similar, where you've got your standard basic programs that they have, and then each of the programs have a list of settings that you can pass in. J.D. Edwards would call those processing options.
Sure.
That when you run a report, you've got your filters or data selection that you put on it, that kind of stuff. And then, of course, the very underlying code, in this case on J.D. Edwards, it's C code, which I'm assuming did you find that with D365, you make the code right to, or the code changes are actually in .NET or?
So on the projects I've worked on in D365, it's mostly been with integrations. I haven't been the person digging into the actual code set itself. But again, J.D. Edwards is one of the most flexible that are out there. A lot of other ERP systems are not going to let you make nearly as many code changes as that.
Right.
D365 you can, but you need somebody who really has that level of understanding of what's going on underneath. And SAP just flat out won't let you do it.
Right. I think it has something to do with the German. Hey, we engineered it this way. Is it okay to make I'm a German background, so can I imitate a German accent?
I was going to say, with both of our last names, there's probably the ability.
A little bit of German in there?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But so I think, I remember there being this controversy within the J.D. Edwards community, at a company. I remember some pretty heated discussions. When you have a change that you want to make, okay, you can't do it via configuration. You have to do it via code.
Yep.
And you can go in and you can change base code. Okay, that's one way of doing it. Sometimes small, sometimes complex. I don't think we get as lucky on those 3-line code changes. That doesn't happen all the time. Or do you copy the object and make it your own and change it from there? Or do you build something completely custom? So copy, modify a copy, or build brand new from scratch. What do you?
The answer to your question is yes.
I gave you you get A, B, or C. Which one's the best way?
It depends on the situation, honestly.
Well, isn't it sometimes half of one and
Right.
6 of the other? Or what do we say in Wisconsin?
It's a horse apiece.
A horse apiece. What does that mean?
That's a different podcast.
Okay.
But no, to your point, it's going to depend. I guess I kind of look at it with a couple of guidelines. If the change you're looking to make, and I'll just pick on sales order entry, just because
That's probably one of the most common that companies modify.
Exactly. So if the change that you're looking to make is going to be universal across any way that you're going to want to enter sales orders, it very likely makes sense to put that change into the existing J.D. Edwards sales order entry application, because you're going to want to use this everywhere that you're entering sales orders.
Right.
Now, obviously that's going to increase retrofitting effort when you have to upgrade, but you're also making sure that you are taking the new functionality that J.D. Edwards has in their sales order application when they upgrade. So your sales order version should work with all the rest of J.D. Edwards software. You just have to make sure that your modification and change that you made continues to play nice with the code that J.D. Edwards has, assuming it's still needed.
Sure.
Maybe it's a fix that they put in and now they have that feature. If you make a copy of it, you run the risk, and I have seen this, where you copy sales order entry and make the change, and now it's time to upgrade. Okay, well, we want to get through our upgrade as quickly and efficiently as possible. So what we're going to do is we're not going to make any changes to our copy of sales order entry.
Let it ride.
Let it ride. So it's not going to get any of the new functionality of the new version.
Yep.
And
some red lights and alarms are going off in my mind about that.
Exactly. And if that continues, you're not getting any of the efficiency benefits, security benefits, functionality benefits, anything that are coming with your ongoing licensing fees. You're just still running code like it's 1999.
Right. But I would think, too, that the things that call it and the things it calls, you run the further risk, the further you get away from it, that it's just not going to work.
Correct. And then you're forced to take all of those changes and retrofit those changes that are coming from J.D. Edwards back into your copy.
That sounds like a pretty heavy lift there.
Exactly, which is why I lean towards making surgical changes to the vanilla, if you will, J.D. Edwards application.
It's very diplomatic, Matt. Very diplomatic.
I try.
Yeah.
That's why if you can build it into a business function and then make a call, then it makes it a little bit easier for that retrofitting. And then you bring up the option of building something completely from scratch.
Right.
Okay. If for some reason the J.D. Edwards sales order entry module was so completely horrible and different than
for your organization,
then okay, go ahead and do that.
But then you own it, and there is no retrofit path.
Correct. Then the other question I would ask is there a partner company or a bolt-on or even another system on another platform that you might be able to develop and then use an integration to bring that sales order information into J.D. Edwards and then continue processing, because you love J.D. Edwards for tracking your financials and handling manufacturing and distribution. You just don't like the sales order entry piece.
Right. Yeah. Good example. Yeah. I mean, it's a pretty complex world, but that I think we hit on a pretty big nail there, where it's a bit of information that people really could use, especially people new to that tool, J.D. Edwards in this case, knowing when to make changes and whatnot, hopefully using good judgment, because it's going to have a ripple effect down the line. You mentioned integrations. I know that J.D. Edwards has come out with a new, well, I don't want to say new because it's been being
it's improved every year if you're talking about what I think you're talking about.
I am, I'm sure. So tell us about orchestrations.
Orchestrations are amazing. So orchestrations,
Like some would say it's breathed new life into the J.D. Edwards platform.
correct. It started out as IoT orchestrator because J.D. Edwards sensed, especially in the manufacturing space, that there was a lot of information to be captured off of machines, sensors, and to be able to bring that into J.D. Edwards. And so they developed a platform to be able to have that data.
I wonder when the aha came on that, boy, hey guys, this could be used for so much better, more than what we're thinking.
I think it happened about the time that people started bringing that data into J.D. Edwards and then wanting to take action on it. And
like trigger events and things like that.
Events and things like that. And so it was like, oh, well, can you give us the ability to, trigger some custom code or do whatever? And they're like, well, maybe we can give you the ability to trigger actual events within J.D. Edwards. And in essence, orchestrations were born.
Right. And so if you are on a J.D. Edwards system today and you're not on a version that allows you to do orchestrations, you need to really think about whether you try to get there, because it is a game changer.
Yep.
It is going to extend your system, allow you to interact with other systems so much quicker, easier, and more robustly. It's a pretty awesome tool.
Yeah, it basically gives you the ability to pass data in and out of JD Edwards using JSON, which is fairly universal, and to be able to trigger logic within JD Edwards, launch applications, launch reports, and have that logic execute in absentia. So without a user sitting at a keyboard, you can have it populate the screen in sales order entry, run the exact same logic that a user would be running if they were sitting there, and have that order placed in JD Edwards.
Yep. Yeah, it's a really awesome tool. Yeah, I'm trying to think of when when did they first started talking about that?
Oh man, that was
5 years ago, 6 years ago.
Probably
at
more.
least?
It's probably more
like
than
10?
that. It's probably, I don't know if it was 10, but it's been a while. I know I was doing some work before Orchestrator came out with getting information from IoT devices and passing it into JD Edwards, and that was probably, I don't know, 8-9 years ago. So I think it was somewhere after that, but yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And they still, it's not, I've seen it a bunch of times, even within the J.D. Edwards ecosystem, where they'll pick up an idea or a topic or something like that, and then they'll only carry it so far, and they're like, oh, that's not going anywhere. And then that's something that's got legs. And they're still talking about it today. In fact, you did some presentations at our last national user group meeting about that.
Yeah, absolutely. They keep
standing room only
on error handling in your orchestrations. Not that you should have errors, but in the event that they occur, how can you best handle them? But no, they continue to come out with additional features, additional functionality related to it, and kind of marrying that with the concept of UDOs, or user-defined objects, and they have really been able to.
We don't have a sneeze button.
Maybe we should get one.
So if that was picked up, sorry about that.
Or we can always edit it out later.
That's right.
So no, but taking orchestrations and the concept of user-defined objects, which are non-code related ways of changing and adjusting JD Edwards, really marrying those two together to be able to have customization, if you will, but with some logic within your JD Edwards environment without making a change to that base code set. So you can actually put a button on a screen that the user can press and launch an orchestration and have it accomplish a piece of logic. And if you're on the latest and greatest version, you can actually launch workflows and actually build a little bit of logic into that button itself. And it all resides outside of the code base.
Wow.
So when you upgrade,
there's nothing to upgrade then.
There's nothing to upgrade. Your logic and that orchestration are encapsulated and are there for you to run. You just need to verify that it still works.
Right. And it basically just runs the new version of the code.
Exactly.
Yeah. Wow. That's pretty powerful. Yeah. Speaking of the conference, it was standing room only.
That session was, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's been really great getting back in person. This was year 2 of being back in person for the national events.
For Blueprint,
Year 2, and
it was year 2, and for In Focus, this was actually the first year that they had the J.D. Edwards specific deep dive conference back in Denver. So it was, which is where J.D. Edwards was founded. So it was great to be able to get back to the roots of J.D. Edwards, if you will, and spend a couple of days with people who eat, sleep, and breathe J.D. Edwards.
Yep. Blueprint was in Vegas last year.
2 years ago, and then it was in Dallas this last year. Yep.
Dallas this last year.
Yep.
And the first year back for them, the one in Vegas, I've only been to Vegas a couple times. It was hot.
It was hot. Like 110 hot.
Yeah.
So
well, they'd probably say that's a cold breeze.
It's a dry heat.
It's a dry heat. Yeah, I hear that. It's a dry heat. How does that work to jog in?
It doesn't. You know, I like to try to be a little bit healthy. You're eating a lot of good food and
quote good food.
Yeah. It tastes good. It's probably not great for you,
Probably
but have some good meals. Thought I'd go get a little bit of exercise, but it was only in the 70s when I started the run first thing in the morning, and then I turned the corner and was out in the sun, and by then it was 85 degrees, and let's just say it was a little bit shorter of a run than I originally anticipated.
Yeah, I think the rest of the team probably was a bit surprised that you went and did that, and like, wow, he's got a lot of tenacity.
Yeah, I did end up having a liquid IV after that and consuming a lot of fluids because you don't want to get dehydrated out in the desert.
Yeah, and this last one, the one this year in Dallas, that was a lot. It was still warm, but it was nowhere near like Vegas, and
it had really good barbecue.
Yeah, I 100% agree. 100% agree.
Really good barbecue and really good steaks.
Yeah, that's for sure. Yeah, and I to that event I wore a cowboy hat, and I was surprised at how much how far that went, how people like that. People seem to treat me nicer with a cowboy hat on. That I think I need to do a case study on why that is, the psychology of cowboy hats.
Perhaps that's food for a different podcast.
Yes, I think that's 3 of them. Jordan, you got that written down? Cowboy hats. What's the psychology behind them? So, well, I really appreciate your time, Matt. Really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me about this stuff. It was enlightening. I'd say maybe a little entertaining as well.
Hopefully. I find it interesting, but, I enjoy this kind of stuff. So.
Yeah, getting down into the weeds. We are so glad that you're able to join us today. Make sure to follow us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube for more exciting content. Make sure to reach out to us through our website if there's an IT topic you want us to discuss. And thank you for joining us in this conversation. As you chart your course to your next destination, may your journey be filled with purpose and confidence. Until then, stay true to your compass.